You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode 126 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'll be sharing another conversation that I had with a podcast listener. So Marco emailed us back in December where he mentioned that he'd been in the program for over 30 years, currently has about 6.5 years of abstinence. And we finally got to schedule a recording for the end of February. And if you can tell by the sound of my voice, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so I'm doing my best here. Two things came to mind for readings for this episode during our recording. Number one was from the pamphlet called Recommitting to Recovery, and this came up during our conversation. And also, Marco has a story at the back of the Green Book, and I will be reading from both of these. So starting off with Recommitting to Recovery, this was a pamphlet that was conference approved in October of 22 and is on the saa-recovery.org website. I'll leave a link for this in the show notes. And it says, "Welcome. We celebrate and affirm the courage and honesty you display. We welcome all sex addicts who want recovery. We welcome all who want freedom from sexual addiction, including those who are struggling today. You are not alone. You are among many in our program who have gone back to acting out at some time. Some of us have gone through periods of inner circle behavior and then returned. As a returning addict, you are needed. Your courage and honesty are inspiring and keep us humble in light of our own addictions. In your return, we are reminded of the addiction's power and our powerlessness over it. Like you, we felt the consequences from our acting out. For many of us coming back, we found it difficult to face others in the fellowship. Some of us doubted that recovery was still possible. In our renewed shame, we were initially afraid to face these rooms again or admit to what we had done. When we shared our behavior, we were not condemned and, over time, felt great relief. When we returned, we needed to acknowledge what didn't work. Many of us acted out because we were relying on willpower or were trying to work the program alone and failed. We thought we knew how this program worked, but we didn't. Just going to meetings wasn't enough. We needed something more. The 12 steps of SAA offered us a solution. It doesn't matter how long or how deep we were in the inner circle, the same steps lead the way out. We re-examined the steps with the help of a sponsor and found a new path." There is a little bit more in this pamphlet, and if you're interested, like I mentioned, I will leave a link in the show notes. And I also mentioned that Marco had written one of the stories at the back of the SAA book, and this is the story called Another Door Opens, and I believe it is story number 16, at least in the third edition. And this is on page 178, and so I'll be reading from 178 and 179. "I've come to know that my sex addiction is extremely powerful. I cannot restore myself to sanity, so my recovery and my life depend on a combination of surrender, footwork, and grace. God gives me guidance in my life if I look for it. I am surrounded by God's blessings at all moments of my life. If I can slow down and open my mind and heart enough, I will see these blessings. I can get access to God through a myriad of ways: phone calls, exercise, sincere prayers, meditation, and reflection. Connecting with people and nature, listening with my heart in meetings, experiencing emotions, braving long-term therapy, taking care of and loving myself with showers, baths, oils, and flowing water, rocking my baby, sharing with friends, holding my wife, petting my cats, and working the 12 steps with my sponsors. I can be renewed when I'm able to see the world through others' eyes, admit my faults, take advice, or let go of something that wasn't mine in the first place. I need to set boundaries and work on maintaining the willingness to set them. Breathing exercises help me lose the sexual craving. Self-reflective, creative, and purposeful writing also help me a great deal. When I look at my own defects, instead of just blaming others or rationalizing, I am often restored to the soundness of mind and spirit. None of these recovery efforts, which are outlined in the 12 steps and traditions and in other SAA literature, works all the time. I have to apply them continuously so I can live happy, joyous, and free of my obsession to act out sexually. I have found some new tools that seem to help. I know that for me, a successful program must have an approach that is multifaceted. Physical, my body; mental, my thinking; emotional, my feelings; psychological, my psyche; social, my relationships; and spiritual, which I believe embodies the combination of all the above. So if you do want to read more of Marco's story, that is called Another Door Opens. So without further ado, I'm now ready to turn it over to my conversation with Marco. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it. I am super grateful to have Marco on the podcast, and Marco emailed us back a few months ago, and I had just started scheduling new recordings and was honored to reach out to you. I know you've been in the program for quite some time, and wanted to share your story here. And so welcome to the podcast, Marco.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
So the way I usually start the podcast is talking about the three circles. It's a great way to introduce our guests to the listening community. Are you comfortable sharing what's in your inner, middle, and outer circles?
Well, I've been in the program for 34 years, and the circles have changed over that time many, many times. But to more, let's say, for the inner circle to be more inclusive and to be less inclusive of, a variety of behaviors. Currently, my sobriety date is dating from March 9th, 2017. And so those circles have to do with massage parlors. I had been doing that up to the sobriety, which I had never done before. But so massage parlors, and the general one is any kind of illegal behavior, which is, voyeurism as an illegal type of behavior, and any inappropriate contact. And those are probably the main things that could get me in trouble. And then for the middle circle, I kind of divide my middle circle into gradations. Deep, middle. So deep middle for me right now has to do with maybe unfettered searching on the internet, which I'm not a person who's into pornography, never liked that. It's actually just not appealing. But other stuff more like taboo and fetish. It's kind of fetish. It's not really fetishy, but it's weird. It's bad. So the unfettered access to the internet, it's not in my inner circle, but it's in deep middle because it's so wide open. There's so much potential for getting lost in the rabbit hole. And then other things that I have in my middle circle, like if I'm in things like Facebook for the wrong reason, and Instagram, all those things, because I don't do them for any good reason at all. And so they're in my middle. And like even YouTube, not just being on YouTube, but being on it for wrong purposes, for sexual gratification, basically, would it be. And then middle would be, so those social media websites, and masturbation could be in the middle or could be in the outer. It depends on where I'm at with that. So it could be either one. I've had it in the inner before, but I think the issue for me is whether it's included with images in that could be more damaging. But the masturbation in and of itself, it does not tend to, I don't want to be cocky about this, but it does not tend to lead me to hell. We'll call it an addiction, not an ethical issue. Powerlessness, unmanageability, pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. And it doesn't take a lot of time. So that's the other thing about it for me. And so those are mainly middle. There's probably 1,000 other things that
Yeah.
come up,
Yeah.
like, how about, oh, I know. I'm at a supermarket and I see somebody who's good looking and I change directions. That's actually deeper middle because it leads to cruising. And that's another one. Cruising isn't my inner, if it's like real cruising, but, middle or deep middle would be, changing directions for the purpose of maybe voyeurism, because I'm not really going to be trying to hit on people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then outer is a whole bunch of things. This is outer. I intentionally reached out to you after I listened to a couple of the podcasts. So it's basically telling my story, and it's for a newcomer, for not just newcomers, people who have been around, but telling my story because I've been around so long that I forgot what the hell happened. I've been around so long with steps, working the steps, having a sponsor, sponsoring people. And it's like I had various lengths from 10 years of sobriety, which I lost, and then 2 years, a couple of times, and I've always taken it seriously. But it's like, wow, it's so long. But what is it that happened? So I have a chance to share more about that. And then other things like exercise, play sports, I work out, eating healthy, relationships, spending time with my wife, having quality, reaching out to my daughters, being good to them, getting enough sleep, self-care, brushing my teeth, flossing. So, there's a lot of, and then all of that is journaling, praying, meditating, working the steps. There's a whole lot of outer circle behaviors.
Yeah, it's awesome to have an outer circle that's ever expanding. Taking care of oneself is really, really awesome. I have not taken care of myself in the middle circle when I notice that I'm not taking care of my hygiene and things like that means I'm usually heading off the rails. So if I'm brushing and flossing and all those good things, I'm in a good headspace.
Yeah, my flossing dates from my sobriety date.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, I was flossing and then and showering more often, and things like that. The sobriety, I was actually showering twice a day in the early sobriety because my wife does that, and it's like I do feel a little better, like a drug, a good drug from a shower, something like simple like that. So that self-care is something that I continue to monitor and try to take care of myself, love myself.
Yeah. So you said you've been in the program for 34 years. That would be what, 1990?
I got sober in AA in 1987, July 23rd.
Okay.
And then I think within 2 years, I found myself in big trouble. I'm actually in our green book. I wrote my story. It's there.
Oh, cool.
And, but I found myself in trouble at that time with a voyeurism situation. And so 1989, I entered another S program. So maybe 1990 is when I started coming. Oh, no, I met my wife in 1992, and I switched over to SAA in 1992 because in the other program, having sex with your girlfriend, which is not
when you're not married,
slip, and that's not a slip for me, man. I mean, that's like actually I tend towards anorexia, so it's actually the opposite of a slip. I need it. I mean, I don't need it, but it's like it's healthy.
Yeah.
So I'd say SAA consistently from 1992. So we're looking at 32 years is probably for our program.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've been in since 2002, and my current sobriety date is from 2015. And so I've had multiple years of abstinence, and then a slip here and there, and then there's been one or two pretty dramatic relapses where I was not working the steps, and I went out for a couple of years, kept coming to meetings and stuff, but just not working on my steps, not working with sponsees, and it was enough to knock me back into my old behaviors. And getting back to the steps and working the program and being of service is what really started to pull me back around.
Yeah. And that's the other reason I joined your podcast was I had a resentment. I was going to one SAA meeting because I go to a bunch of others,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, what are all these little newcomers? I mean, I like newcomers. I know they're the lifeblood of the program, but it's like, what about my people, the ones who've been
Mm-hmm.
around? And I finally was like, well, maybe you should look instead. I could have a resentment, but I could let go of it and look around for other places to meet people who've been around. And here I am with you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, got a chance to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah. This is super awesome. Yeah. Some of the guys up in San Francisco, they've been in the program since the late 80s, and hearing their stories of long-term sobriety and everything has been awe-inspiring. I get to see these guys a couple times throughout the year. I am in the South Bay, so I'm about 50 miles away from the San Francisco meetings, but I see them on Zoom, and I love getting to hang out with them at our annual retreat, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks. But yeah, being around people that have long-term sobriety or have been in the program a long time and have a lot of institutional knowledge on the steps and how the program works is something that, I really enjoy.
Yeah, it's what I've been lacking. So now I'm
Hmm.
doing some footwork.
Yeah. So do you do in-person meetings or Zoom meetings?
Well, I mean, since the pandemic, I mean, I have one in-person SAA,
Hmm.
but I don't go to it regularly. So I have other programs in person,
Yeah.
um, but I kind of stuck with Zoom because I have much more choice. Like I'm showing up to a Thursday night one, and one in Houston noon Zoom is kind of pretty
Hmm.
big. But yeah, I think it's mainly Zoom. But there is a Friday one that I know of. But my wife likes it if I stay home on Friday night, so it's kind of nice.
Hmm.
So Zoom has been the predominant, just since the pandemic. Before
Yeah.
that, it was all in person.
Yeah, the Houston noon Zoom meeting, I've been to once or twice. It's at 10 o'clock for me.
Yeah, it's
It,
10 o'clock for me. Yeah, we're both
yeah.
Pacific. Yeah.
So when I talk about the noon Zoom meeting on the podcast, that was one that we actually started here in the Bay Area. And so it's separate from the Houston noon Zoom meeting. But yeah, when our noon meeting, when the pandemic hit, we went over to Zoom, and then we were eventually able to go back to the church. And it was nice. I got to go into that meeting today in person. But when we went back to the church, we let the Zoom room stay open. And it's been awesome just getting to see people of all different types and from around the world, different levels of sobriety. But yeah, of course, there are so many more newcomers than people that have been around for a long time. So, trying to get people lined up with sponsors has been a difficult task.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you if you are okay with going into kind of not necessarily first step ish, but kind of your background, upbringing, and then what was the rock bottom moment. I know that you talked about the voyeurism incident that brought you into the program, but kind of what it was like going from AA into SAA. So, any little highlights in your background that you would like to share here?
Yeah, I mean that may be part of the formative experiences in a family that slowly deteriorated as I was approaching my adolescence. Up to that point, it was kind of idyllic, and
Hmm.
in many ways, homemaker mom. So you have a mom full time.
Hmm.
That's cool, and then a dad who's a doctor and an athlete, and young and good looking, and loves sports and has money. So we travel. So confident in my school, pretty cocky kid. I played football, outgoing, great in school, maybe just very good in school, but I didn't really care. I was very good, whatever. It was easy. So basically, living life like pretty rarefied atmosphere for the most part up to sixth grade. And then by seventh grade, I think my dad started falling apart. I think his career got to him. He had a lot of things going, a lot of pressure from his practice and other things he was doing. And then his alcoholism and drug addiction. So I got alcoholic and a drug addict and his own pills, I think, for the most part, and like
Mm-hmm.
mainly it was like pills to wake you up in the morning, and then alcohol at night, and then maybe some benzodiazepines to
Mm-hmm.
help
Mm-hmm.
level it off or something. And and then in that time, so he was pretty erratic around that, but that would have been relatively minor. But my dad, he happens to be a street fighter also.
Oh, wow.
They're like mixed martial arts is scary, and they're scary. I'm not saying they're not, but
Yeah.
before there was that, if you're street fighting, then there's things like you're supposed to protect, your testicles. They
Mm-hmm.
talk about kicking people in the head. Many stories where most of the time we were just fascinated, but then he would lose control, and you didn't know if he was going to turn on you.
Ooh.
And he's lethal. Like he could,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, broken jaws. Few people with broken jaws, and I know in mixed martial arts that was listed at the worst injury. And he's breaking jaws. So you're a kid knowing that he can break jaws. He's angry, he's depressed, and he's beating my brother. And so watching that, and my mom sometimes not unleashed because he's concerned about his medical license, but
Yeah.
sometimes unleashed, and just treating a lot of menace and intimidation, and then impending doom. So basically, a lot of trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd say what I have is complex trauma. It's not like I go and have flashbacks of things like, oh, I'm traumatized. I don't have that, but it's more like hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the idea of, I figure what happened was my trust was completely broken, shattered. A guy who's my hero became a lethal, dangerous threat. So I think I just, lost, really was damaged the ability to trust. And so around that time, I also was adolescent. So, I
Mm-hmm.
found like, he had a whole stack of he was subscribing to Playboy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had access to that, and, like stacks of them. And I think that was formative because I would go through those and pick, because my addiction, I'm not, I'm like, if a person, there's certain persons that are not interesting at all to me. And so I would like curate certain
Yeah.
pictures
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
Playboy. So it's like, they're not, I don't want, some of them I don't even like, and I'm not going to tell you details because that's weird. So you don't need it. I mean, it's not weird. It's just too much
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. Yeah. Not
But the
necessary.
idea is curate it in a folder, and that's part of the thing. It's like this unreal thing. My sexuality is an unreal thing. It's based on partly frustration and not being able to get the girl, and still having that, and then also emasculation because I'm not able to stand up to my dad. So I think that all amalgam kind of built into a kind of an angry fantasy life.
Mm-hmm.
So a fantasy life that is based on power and control, which is right. It's in our book, and it's that's why pornography is boring. It's two consenting adults. Why would that be
Mm.
anything? And they seem kind of like animals to me. So it's like, whoa, I don't get that. I'm a little bit like of a prude sex act, So anyway, so moving forward, basically, that was the concoction. Then we were wealthy and drinking and using sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
Totally legit subculture. It was fine. So combined all that. Basically, by the time I was 26, I was destroyed by alcohol and unemployable. Not just unemployed, but
Mm-hmm.
unemployable. And really, you could say I was homeless on that day, but I had been homeless, not walking around homeless, but homeless like I'm on a couch, my brother's couch for 2 months.
Yeah.
I didn't have an apartment. I call that homeless. And the day before, the day I got sober in AA was the day that I just screamed at the lady I was living with, so I was homeless again. But then that was a big changing point for me because I found an ability that I've never found before, ever, which is absolute commitment to recovery.
Mm.
I had been in AA meetings once a week for a year because of DUIs, 2 DUIs, driving drunk for a third, trying to get a third one. Not trying to, but not clueless about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I hit the surrender that I'd never found in SAA, which is an absolute surrender. Like, so the ability to commit to recovery was showered upon me. So the idea of like, they call it sweetly reasonable, or you know, battered into, a state of willingness. And so basically committed to that program. And I'm staying sober, working steps, have a job, have money in the bank, living in a recovery home, go to meetings, have a sponsor, take the steps. Like, I wouldn't talk to you if you didn't read the big book on a regular basis. Like, what? Not that I was against you. I just think you're dangerous for me, because step 2 tells me that I'm insane. And I knew it with alcohol, that it wouldn't take much to think it would be okay to have some alcohol. And so where I was first confronted with this addiction was, I'm in the recovery home, and I'm coming home at riding my bike to work. I repossessed my car on purpose, so I didn't want to be a poor person. Live within your means, way within your means. That was part of my spiritual awakening. So basically, I get home at we were swing shift, so it's like 1 o'clock, and I'm in the living room watching like some exercise program and masturbating. You can't even barely see it. There's no nudity, old days. And then some nights staying up till 5 or 6, not sleeping. And then I got to go to my meeting and then go to work again. Like, what kind of a life is this? And I remember praying on my knees, because I prayed on my knees then, and crying. Like, that was like the real first big taste of just powerlessness around this disease. Like, it's the absurdity of doing that. Mainly just, I'm living a different life, and this is not consistent with it. And then the other one was, so I went back to school to get a new career, and I was in the middle of that. And I don't want to get too specific here, but I'm just going to say I was doing actions that were directly contradictory to that will destroy that, absolutely destroy it. And not doing it once or 5 times, but 35. And talking to my sponsor in AA, and he's like, first he was like, that's cool. And then by the end, he's like, what the hell? And so absolutely powerless to stop it, and literally had to get a key given to I had to turn it in and do something inconvenient to even escape it, like Pavlov's dog. And completely, so, and that was when I think I shared about it in an AA meeting, and somebody mentioned SA. And so that was then I ended up in SA, and that would probably be 1989.
Yeah.
And then I went there for a while, and gosh, I remember my first sobriety there. I had 3 months. I'm looking around, what are these people's problems? They keep slipping. And I'm like, my AA sobriety is like stellar. And then I slipped. And that, I think, that's not fair to count that time from that early, because I think I stopped coming for a while. Because that was like, oh my God, I had no willingness back. And I was just like humbled. And that's that theme I was telling you about.
Yeah.
So cocky, about my recovery in AA, but then SAA, or sex, a whole different animal. So that's basically, and like I shared with you earlier, that flip, but I did get back to SA, and I got some time. I had I would do first steps in my SA. I never take, you could do all the stuff that we say and still completely lose sobriety. I've proven that many times, but it's absurd that you wouldn't do the stuff we say. I'm tolerant of sponsors that don't, but it's like, what the heck? This is going to be super hard even if you do it. And that's what the program offers. I've always done it. But I had 30 days of sobriety and went to Mexico in SA. And I happened to meet my wife now of 30 years. And I'm grateful, because SA said you don't sex with self or others outside of a marriage. And I would have never hung out with this nerd. I mean, he is a nerd, never cigarettes, virgin, nothing. He's 24, nerd. And which I like. I like nerds. That's not derogatory. But I wouldn't have been interested, because it's like, dude, you're not going to get anything. But SAA, that'd be a flip. And so I was willing to hang out with her, and it was cool. I liked hanging out with her. It was cool. And I'm not scamming, no scamming. And my theory is that it allowed me, that SA sobriety allowed me long enough time with her, which is only 2 weeks, until she broke, quote unquote, broke, as in she fell in love with me. But only 2 weeks of hanging out. And then we fell in love on July 9th, 1992, and in Mexico City. And in staying sober and not acting out, was the, we wouldn't have been crossing any path if I was drinking. We really never drank,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so that allowed it. And then when we came back, we were willing, she was willing to be sexual. And so that's when I switched into SAA. So that's why I think I dated 1992 is about right.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
by August 1992 is how long I've been coming back. Is that enough? That's the background getting
Oh,
me
yeah,
into
yeah.
SAA. Yeah.
Yeah. So were you working the steps in SA?
Um, yes, always working the steps. I always had a
Okay.
sponsor. Hans. My sponsor was Hans. Now I'm remembering him. And, Hans. So, yeah, I always worked the steps. How far? I don't know. I know I did a first step at least twice in
Mm-hmm.
SA in the group and on my own, but we did steps together. Yeah. And I was absolutely immersed in the steps in AA, but I worked the steps with him. Did I get through all the steps? That's a good question. I'm not sure how
Mm-hmm.
far I got with
Yeah. So in turn, as you're working the steps in SAA, you also sponsor others.
Oh yeah, I mean during the pandemic, I'm open to sponsoring, and I've been around for a long time, and I think I counted them once, and it was like 18, and then I'm
Wow.
thinking, now 18 is not that big if people are not contacting you all the time, if they're
Yeah.
not active working the steps, but if they're reading fifth steps, see, that could be crazy. But I mean,
Yeah.
I counted 18, and then it was when I stopped like announcing myself to be a sponsor, and there was attrition there. But I've always been willing. I mean, in AA, I was sponsoring. I mean, I was overly willing, like too cocky. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, if you have one day of sobriety, you can. I mean, because we're not experts. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit on the side of too cocky. But it's like, well, you're an expert. I mean, I had people I sponsored 5 years sober in this program, still not
Mm-hmm.
ready. I don't know, not sure what I know. Like supposed to be an expert or something. But so I've always been willing, and I never had that thing that held me back because I'm a sex addict and I'm trying to stay sober, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been through the steps, and so I tend to be willing to sponsor people. I always have, and I do. I have had times in SAA where it was hard to find a sponsor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's another reason why I like to put my hand out there. But again, I found the same principle, which is, well, if you're going to one meeting a week with 10 people in it, I think there's a reason you have a problem. And, I had to do some writing and prayer and look at
Mm-hmm.
myself. The resentments are awesome. I love resentments because they train me to recover. So the resentment brings out the truth as long as I don't just stay in the resentment and I look at my
Mm-hmm.
part.
Mm-hmm.
And so that one, go to different meetings and you'll meet different people. But I do know that a lot of people in SAA are awful reluctant to sponsor.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had one of my sponsees, I can remember he took on a sponsee and got imposter syndrome. And I don't know if I can carry this person through the steps. I'm just like, just, do what I taught you. And if you have any questions, bring them back to me. And we were able to work like that. There would be times where he was unsure of how to approach a problem with a certain sponsee, come back to me, and I'd find a spot in the big book or the green book and say, yeah, I think focus him on this step right here or this prayer right here, and that'll take care of itself. And a few years later, he was helping lead a group of us through the steps. And so
Wow.
I got to work through the steps again in a group, but he and two other of my friends in the program got together. They came up with how they wanted to approach this in a year's worth of time and get a bunch of people through the steps. So it was great. Early on, he was reluctant to take on sponsees, and then he got to a point where he's actually leading a group of people through the steps. And
Yeah, that's
so,
great.
when people are reluctant, I try to give them that little nudge. Hey, you have knowledge that someone else doesn't. Share that with them.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's like here I have all this wealth of experience and knowledge, but is that the thing? I mean, my story might not be the thing that reaches that guy. It's your story. I mean, we don't
Hmm.
know whose story it is. So I mean and I have a guy who's sponsoring people today I talked to, and they're all slipping all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of he was struggling with that because, he's doing, and he puts a lot of effort into it, and he's doing his best, and they're slipping and they're losing focus and willingness to even do anything. And so, and I've been through probably it all. I can't remember all of it, but if we talk enough, I could probably remember it.
Yeah. Earlier on, when you were talking about being humbled, when I had my relapse, I remember hearing from someone in program, be humble or be humbled. And it's
Yeah,
just
well, I mean,
such
that's
a great
also an
term.
AA.
Yeah, yeah.
AA is humiliation or humility. Which one do you
Hmm.
want?
Yeah,
So no,
yeah.
no. In my experience with the humility, being humbled is again that kind of on some level arrogance about my AA recovery, and then even SAA getting a couple years and losing it, and then a couple years and losing it, thinking I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing, and then not only losing it, but losing it at the worst possible level, much worse than anything I'd
Hmm.
ever done. It wasn't. It was because I was exposed to it. It was like in the wrong place in the career, but it was humbling because it's like
Hmm.
I mean, like I literally at one point was having trouble even believing not in God but in the steps because I always work the steps. So you tell me to work the steps, I'm working the steps. But
Hmm.
I do know it's about quality. If I'm and I can't always force it, but the idea of being, a surrender, and I
Hmm.
can't. I mean, Bill W. took LSD to try to simulate that idea of surrender. So sometimes the life is going to hit you like a rock. The rock gets smoothed over by the ocean, and I think most people just disappear. They stop going. Who wants to
Hmm.
face it? Denial is better. But I didn't ever do that. I mean, I had denial, but I never ran away. I stayed with it, and it was painful. My ego hated it, and I was angry. I used to hate chips. I actually wrote an article
Hmm.
for it was called the Outer Circle. Then now it's
Yeah,
the
it's the
magazine.
outer circle now. It
Oh no, it
used to
was
be
it was
the
the
plain brown
wrapper.
wrapper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. The plain brown wrapper. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it was the plain brown, and it was like this resentment article, but it was like jokey about how stupid chips are. Because if I've had 2 years and I'm getting a 30-day chip, I know some people are better at that being humble, but to me, that sounds like scumbag loser. That sounds
Mm.
like failure. And so I remember just hating the chips for a while.
Yeah, my second sponsor, he often talked about not trying to count the importance of days and focus on the quality of today and
Yep.
not get wrapped up with, how many days of consecutive time you've had.
Yep. That's
It's,
one
the
day at a
call.
time, too.
Yeah.
My sponsor said one.
Yeah.
And the other one is that when I lose sobriety, because if you count, the time I've been in program
Hmm.
and then the time I've had, if you took the times that I've been in sobriety and you took them away and said that was acting out, let's say 50% of those sobriety times were acting out, I don't think I'd be talking to you.
Hmm.
I don't,
Hmm.
even 20% of those more. I don't know. Because anything, I need more to get the same effect. I need more to get the same effect. I got to go deeper. I got to go worse. And
Hmm.
I have part of that thing from my dad is there's part I'm a pretty nice guy, but there's part that's like fucking not nice,
Yeah.
not at all nice. Yeah, so yeah, that's I had to look at it that way too, which is the sobriety I'd lost. It hurts. I'm disappointed, but that times that you weren't acting out, those were times that you weren't acting out. That doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to value that too, yeah, I had to do all kinds of things to keep coming back all these years.
Yeah. Were there other things that you wanted to talk about before we close up this episode?
Maybe just to get a little more current might
Oh,
be
yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please.
recently in September, I when it started reworking the steps again of my own, because I've been through the steps many times, and I had recently been through the steps. I mean, not recently; it had been like 3 months since I worked through with a sponsor, or 5 months maybe,
Hmm.
and because my middle circle was getting sloppy around some of that social media stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started that new journey, which led me to you, by the way,
Mm.
and started reworking the steps. At first, it was me working the steps, and then I became more aware that I better get a hold of my old sponsor because I was reading part of the fifth step to a sponsee, and it was too long, and I'm thinking, ugh. this guy needs to do his stuff. I mean, it's not that he couldn't listen to it, but I feel bad. I feel like, I can share my stuff, but not all this much. So I
Hmm.
got back hold of an old sponsor that's another old timer that's been around. So that wish came true. And then we've been working through the steps. And I met a guy named Joe who lives in Minnesota now, but he's from Southern California. And he turned me on to the idea of going to a retreat in Oceanside. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay. So I'm going to that April 5th. And just a lot of things. I haven't been talking to my wife about some of these middle circle things, and to let her in on some of that stuff. Mainly, I know she's not going to freak out, but it's like I'm just kind of an avoider. Like I
Oh
don't
yeah.
want any chance that the person's gonna be mad at me or anything. So it's like came clean a little bit on some stuff, and with middle circle, and then slowly, I've been away from the middle circle, like a lot. Like I shared with you
Hmm.
today, I was struggling a little bit with the bubble, which is not
Yeah.
happening that much. And but anyways, it's kind of been a journey through the steps. I just officially worked step 10 again with my sponsor, and I'm on step 11, and been going to different meetings as a result of it. So it's just kind of an amazing process that I think my higher power led me on to, to recommit to the pro. Oh yeah, one of the first things I did was reread the recommit pamphlet for
Yeah.
SAA,
Yeah. Yeah.
and don't read it like a novel, read it like a textbook. And I took
Hmm.
notes on it, the various things that one would do if one were actually recommitting versus reading through the words and moving on. And they're just words that I saw because I've seen them a lot. And I actually started doing some of the things that they suggested that a person would do, which is, that's the problem with reading a lot. It's like, you just
Hmm.
read it. Are you doing any of it? So I do it. And that's been another, there's been many things like that, but it's really, kind of relaunched my recovery, and been feeling pretty good about that and hopeful.
Awesome. Yeah. When you had mentioned your recommitment to working the program, I've read that pamphlet a number of times. But yeah, I will be reading that one on this episode in the intro. When you were talking about all that, you had mentioned that just recently that's what led you to find the podcast. And I've been asking this recently of some of our guests on how they found the podcast.
Orange County SAA, which is how
Okay.
I found the retreat. Joe told me, and then Orange County SAA on that website. So I was like
Yep.
clicking around, and you had a little thing on there. I was working out when I was doing it, and then I heard that one of the podcasts when I was working out, and I was listening, and part of my thing is I don't know what the heck happened. I've been around so long, I don't even. I mean, I know my story, but nobody wants to listen for 28 hours. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, but what's the footwork? Could you do some footwork? And then I heard about this, and I wasn't thinking about anything about the volunteering. And
Hmm.
then it came to me later. It was like, well, you might have an opportunity to clarify your story a little bit more if you
Hmm.
volunteered for the podcast. So but I saw it on the Orange County Intergroup website.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I've been working with them. We've had a couple of guests on the podcast that go to the Orange County meetings and have been organizing their retreats, both their fall and spring retreats. I've talked about it here on the podcast as well. But yeah, when they asked if they could share the information on their website, I was like, yes, please. Yeah, I know that the UK intergroup has information on the podcast. They actually have the podcast player up on their website. I think one or two of the intergroups on the East Coast is also looking at getting the code to put the player on their website as well. But yeah, I love trying to get the word out whenever I have the chance going to various Zoom meetings around the country. I, pop in and say, hey, if you haven't heard it before, we in the Bay Area, we've been doing this podcast for a couple of years, and it's a great resource for people of all sorts in the SAA community. And we've attracted a lot of people that have just searched sex addicts on YouTube or on Spotify and it shows up and they were completely unaware that there was a program. And so it's always cool to hear new people finding the program through the podcast and then people who've been in the program for years finding the podcast. So I'm always eager to hear different stories about how people are finding it.
That's
Thanks.
a great How many
Yeah.
how many have you done total?
Uh, Yesterday I posted episode 120.
Wow.
So this one will probably be around 126, around there. I've got a couple of episodes that I've got the bulk of the recording done, and they'll be scheduled over the next month. And so recently I've been able to bank recordings, something that I did not do in the first year. So I was just talking to someone today that a lot of times I would be scrambling to get a guest at the beginning of the week so I can have something to post at the end of the week. And it was a struggle there for a bit, but now I've just got so many people requesting to share their story. I'm also getting recordings from different meetings that they want to share those recordings on the podcast. And so it has been an awesome experience.
Yeah, it's great. Appreciate your service there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know that we wanted to make this episode a bit shorter than an hour to honor your time with that. So, any other things that you wanted to touch on before we close out this episode?
Well, let's see. I don't normally talk to the newcomer who still suffers. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it's arrogant, but it's probably not. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps we tried to carry this message to sex addicts. So the message to newcomers and old timers, people who've been around. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me, the best message is, I keep coming back. I keep working on my humility. And anonymity is a principle that's saving my butt sometimes because, I've been around the meeting. Don't you guys know how important I am? And that is addressing that kind of idea, which is, this is for the older kind, which is, no, it's cool. I can just be a member.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And that's like very nice. But for the newcomers who are hearing this, the idea of, I encourage them to, get committed. If I'm going to get good in basketball or playing a guitar, it's a skill to learn to stay sober. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to get better in guitar, let's say, I've never mastered it. But isn't it like 1,000 hours? But sometimes it's easy for us with a fatal disease to think that we're going to put in 8 hours or something total and, like the change.
Mm-hmm.
But the change is going to be some real concerted long-term effort. And it doesn't always show right away, but over time, I'm living a really good life now with my wife. I'm a good dad. I have financial security. I'm not worried about the police. So things have changed and it's a lot better than it's ever been in my life. And so I'm grateful for SAA for that.
Fantastic. Well, Marco, I really appreciate you reaching out through the email, and I was really glad that we got to schedule this and record here tonight. So thank you so much for being our guest.
Thanks a lot, Jason. I
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
All right. See ya.
Take care. Bye.
Many thanks to Marco for joining us here on the podcast. I really enjoyed having this conversation, and he and I actually talked a little bit longer after we finished the recording. So with the story, Another Door Opens, it has a dual meaning of the voyeurism and the door, and another door opening towards a path of recovery. So for the end of this episode, I had one listener email as well as a YouTube comment. And I wanted to play a little bit of music here, and then I'll close out this episode. So first, I wanted to go to YouTube, and this was just a real quick comment on episode 125 with Craig. And it says, he sounds a lot like Pat Carnes. So that would be Dr. Patrick Carnes, who has written several books on sex addiction and also a founding member of SAA. I did get to hear Dr. Patrick Carnes at an online Zoom retreat last year. It was another S fellowship, and so I didn't quite get to secure the recording to share here on the podcast, but I did reach out and ask if they would be willing to share. So anyway, Craig is not Patrick Carnes. So moving on to the emails, I got this one just today, and it is a quite lengthy one, and super grateful for this. Says, Jason, I want you to know how grateful I am for the podcast. I found it on YouTube. I have to mention, I am a lost nerd also. I've watched the series 8 times. That's awesome. Yeah. That's one I continually go back to. Anyway, getting back to the email, and I will abbreviate the name to just the first letter. My name is C. I have recently discovered that I'm a sex addict and an intimacy and sexual avoidant. Both shocked me. I want to share my story with you because the podcast has been so helpful with starting my path to recovery. I have not attended a meeting in person or online yet. I live in rural Oklahoma, and the nearest meeting is 45 minutes away, and I haven't found a Zoom meeting that syncs up with my schedule. I'm thinking about attending one of the noon Zoom meetings on a Wednesday. My church has a sexual addiction program, but with my job, I'm a bit of a public figure in my local community and felt anonymity would be difficult. But I started with episode 1 and have been listening to 1 or 2 episodes a day for the past few weeks. I am currently on episode 53 with Brian L. That one really hit home. Thanks to your work, I've written my sexual history and my 3 circles. I'm also working through a STEPS program I bought. I read from the Green Book, Voices of Recovery, and some of the other material about sexual addiction daily since starting. I am a Christian, so my higher power is Jesus. I have a lifelong connection to him and find a connection through music, nature, and attending church. I currently attend a non-denominational church. I have my own issues with organized religion as well. I'm glad your higher power has spoken to you through music. I believe that God finds a way to all of us. Thank you for Heilung. They are so awesome. And you're very welcome. I grew up in a physical, verbal, and emotionally abusive home. My dad beat me black and blue several times, yelled and cussed a lot, and in general was not a present dad. He was a very angry man that we walked around on eggshells. My mom played victim and refused to leave. Thanks to the Brian L. episode, I now have a name for what she did to me: emotional incest. She tried to make me her partner and confided much in me, so I hold them both responsible for the nightmare that was my childhood. I keep my distance from them and only do the things that I have to do. I've also realized through Brian's story that I have more than one addiction, food for sure, and I have to be careful with alcohol. I also obsess and have compulsive behavior around any hobby. It is very strange, though, that with all my addictions, I have a wall where I stop with all of them before they consume me. It has to be a God thing. My main inner circle behavior is masturbation to fantasy. I have a whole world of sexual experiences that I've created over the last 40 years, where I create instances where I am someone else having sex with a variety of others. I have a whole cast of characters and situations in my head. I believe I started masturbating around 8 years old when I accidentally witnessed my parents having sex. Things escalated soon after when I was shown a Penthouse magazine from my cousin and had a friend showed me how to masturbate. There are several other instances that have occurred that shape my view of sexuality as well. This has led to a 40-year history of masturbation. What I've learned was this was my world of escape and self-soothing. Of course, shame and guilt always followed me. I, like others, thought this would stop when I married, but soon after I married, I found myself masturbating again and avoiding sex with my wife. Which is a shame because my wife is a wonderful, sweet woman who has a high sex drive and willing to do anything. More shame, more guilt because I couldn't be what she needed. Over the years, I have convinced myself that masturbation was normal and that all guys did it, and I just thought that I had a low sex drive since I didn't want to have sex with my wife very often. Luckily, porn never became an issue for me. I think my values would have always put the brakes on that. Don't get me wrong. Yes, it interests me, and yes, I viewed it, but was not part of my regular practices. But I did put it in my inner circle. My discovery moment wasn't with anyone but myself and Jesus. The scenarios in my fantasies were having to escalate to have an orgasm. And when I found myself not being able to have an orgasm to some pretty graphic scenarios, I told myself that this has to stop because I found myself wanting to view porn, seek an affair, a prostitute, or sexual massage. This highly compromises my values as a Christian, and I said I have to make some changes. I did some counseling with a Christian counselor last year His approach was fine, not too religious. He had me tell my wife that I masturbate, and she took it well. He had me stop masturbating, and I was sober for about 6 weeks, but I bailed on that and him because the temptation was just too great. 7 months later, I found myself back in trouble with escalated fantasizing. I started Googling and watching videos from Dr. Patrick Carnes and Dr. Douglas Weiss, and one day your podcast was suggested in my feed, and I've been hooked ever since. My wife knows I returned to masturbation, but she doesn't know the details behind it, and she would laugh if I told her I was a sex addict. She would say, "You don't want to have sex very often." Plus, I absolutely cannot hurt her in any way, and I know this one day will be one of my steps. The greatest gift you have given me is when you said that you put masturbation in all 3 of your circles. I have it in all 3 of mine also, and it's amazing how this has taken the pressure off to be perfect. I also love your line, progress, not perfection. Over time, I would like to move masturbation to just middle and inner circle as I struggle from my value system if that behavior is Christ honoring. One more thing, I would like to recommend that you check out the group For King and Country. They have a song called Burn the Ships that is a recovery song. I think you will find some of the lyrics very inspiring. They are a Christian group, but their music is not overly evangelistic. It's more artistic and tends to be about the struggles of life. In fact, they get criticized a lot for not mentioning Jesus or God in their music. My apologies for the length of this, but I wanted to share part of my story with you and let you know how much your service has meant to me so far. Signed, C. Oh, thank you so much, C. That was an amazing story. And yeah, no worries about the length of it. So yes, I have listened to For King and Country, and I was trying to find out if I had played their music on the podcast. One of my friends in recovery has sent his recovery playlist to me, and I've played some of the songs on his playlist on the podcast, and he had several songs from For King and Country in that playlist, so I have heard them before, and on this episode I will play a little bit from Burn the Ships.
Don't let it arrest you, this fear of falling again. And if you need a refuge, I will be right here until the end. Oh, it's time to burn the ships, cut the ties, send a flare into the night. Say a prayer, turn the tide, dry your tears and wave goodbye. Step into a new day. We can rise up from the dust and walk away. We can dance upon the heartache, yeah. So light a match, leave the past, burn the ships, and don't you look back.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I should be sharing some more of the songs from my friend's playlist here on the podcast. Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you found the podcast through YouTube. And yeah, if you need any help in finding a Zoom meeting, I know that driving 45 minutes can be quite a commitment. I've done it myself when I drive up to the San Francisco meetings, which is about 50 miles from where I live. But I do also have a lot of close meetings around me. But yeah, if you need help in finding any Zoom meetings, please let me know. I'll be sending you some information as well. And yeah, the episode 53 with Brian, that was an incredible episode. And talking about the emotional incest has been a revelation for a lot of people. Yeah, so I would recommend anyone that struggles with emotional incest to check out that episode. And on that, I left links for another podcast that I listened to called The Mental Illness Happy Hour and the book Silently Seduced When Parents Make Their Children Partners by Dr. Kenneth Adams. And I believe I've linked these on a recent episode. Yeah, and that would be episode 123 with Allison W. from the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. So yeah, thank you so much for that email. I did have another song that I wanted to share here on the podcast, something that came up in my Facebook feed. A few of my friends on Facebook, we've gotten together and done Tool covers before, each recording our individual parts, and we decided to do a 9 Inch Nails song called We're in This Together. And I've been meaning to play this on the podcast for quite some time. I find it a song of overcoming something with other people. I believe it's about a relationship, but I also look at it as program friends helping each other out. And the chorus is, you and me, we're in this together now. None of them can stop us now. We will make it through somehow. You and me, if the world should break in two, until the very end of me, until the very end of you. And so, yeah, that does sound more like a relationship, but I love the thought of unity in this song. And it is one of my spiritual playlist songs. But it was fun to get together and record our individual parts and see how it came together. So this is me with a few of my friends on Facebook, and we recorded this a couple of years ago, and the singer for the band just reposted it the other day. And so, yeah, it reminded me that I wanted to play that here on the podcast. I love that, and I had so much fun playing with those guys. We do have a couple of other recordings out there that we haven't made videos for yet, but yeah, that's one of my outer circle things, is making videos. And over the past month, I've done a bunch of guitar videos, which I hadn't done in nearly a year, and it has felt just so good to do that. But yeah, since just before the retreat, getting warmed up to play guitar again at the talent show, and then afterwards just feeling that connection through playing music, it's been so wonderful. So before my voice totally gives out, I'm going to wrap up this episode. If you did want to provide feedback for the podcast, like our emailer C, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you wanted to be a guest here on the podcast or have any other questions about the program, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.